Hello, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Deidre Reigel Hope and Healing Radio Show. This is no ordinary podcast. This production has heart and soul, healing and wisdom, artists and authors. Deidre has spent her entire life promoting people, projects, and products that further hope and healing. She has also been a positive force in the entertainment industry as a vocalist, performer, musician, composer, conductor, author, and healer. You will be in good hands spending this time with her and her guests as they will guide you into another space where you can relax and feel their positive energy. Thank you for joining us. And now, here is the amazing Deidre Reigel with her special guest.
Welcome to part 6 of the New Beginnings series. Today's guest is Dr. Jayne Marquis. She is a naturopathic doctor and a homeopath. Jayne has always held the belief that we are more than meets the eye. Like a tree, what we see is the trunk, the branches, the leaves, but what is equally important is what is not seen, the roots, the source of nourishment, security, and balance. While receiving her Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, Jayne fell in love with homeopathy. The principles of homeopathy resonated with her profoundly, as she believes that all physical ailments have mental and emotional components. She pursued her Doctor of Homeopathic Medicine from Ontario College of Homeopathic Medicine. Today, Jayne applies her experience, knowledge, passion, and dedication to her current practice and the treatment of every patient she sees. She can be reached at info@inpoweredhealth.com. That's info@inpowered health.com. Now, before Jayne and I begin our wonderful discussion today, let me give you some extra fun facts about this amazing woman. She has her VFR pilot's license. She has been a Canadian ballroom dance champion. She has a hobby of the trampoline. She likes to talk about the benefits of rebounding, lives on a horse farm, and thinks that horses and mucking are therapeutic. And of course, she does eventing on horseback. One final thing, Jayne likes the Wim Hof breathing technique and cold baths. Dr. Jayne Marquis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deidre. That's quite the intro. Thank you so much.
It is quite the intro. Well, you are quite the woman, and I am delighted that we can have this conversation for you to be a guest today. So let's get right to it. You have a website and a podcast called Empowered Health. What is it all about, Jayne?
Well, that's a big topic. So let's see. I started dreaming of doing that in March when we were all locked down, and I felt that my voice wasn't, I wasn't able to use my voice to help people. And it was also like an awakening at that time. I felt like I've been awake since I was a kid. And the things that, formed my early childhood led to me becoming aware of a lot of things quite young. But when all of this happened, I felt very called to action, and I started my podcast, Empowered Health. And yeah, it's a podcast about just helping people remember, because I feel we are all very powerful beings on this planet, but helping them remember just how powerful they are, and that they can make their choices, and they are sovereign and unique human beings, and that choices should come from the heart and from listening inside instead of giving away our power. So that was the main message.
Right. Very, very, very powerful and very important, timely information. I think so many of us on the planet today are beginning to question the systems that we have grown up into, and we're asking if they really work, and we're seeing evidence that they may not work as we expected them to, or they may not work at all. And it seems to me this is where you come in, saying, listen, folks, we have the answers within us. And you've spoken a lot about that concept of we have the answers within us and looking inside for answers. And as you said, not handing our power away and remembering who we are. So let's just for a moment talk about your private practice, if we may. Would I assume correctly, Jayne, that in your years of private practice, this has been your focus with your patients?
Yes. Yeah. And it's such a long journey. So I'll just start as a kid, when I was a child, I went through a really difficult situation. I was living in a very small town of 800 people, and we actually lived on a farm outside of a very small town. And something happened in my family that created discord, and they actually, had a falling out. And what happened was the people in the town often took the side of my grandparents, who took a business from my mother. And I remember being very heartbroken over that. And I felt an outsider. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt judged. And so this brought me to going inside at a really young age to figure out what life was all about. And it also made me question, how we perceive things, and that what looks like is not what it always seems. And I remember my mom saying to me very young, what seems is not, and is not seems, Jayne. And that really sat with me, and it gave me a very inquiring mind and made me question everything. So as I grew up, I looked inside for the truth. And like what I realize now is a connection to the field, or, this web of information that we're surrounded with. And if we go to stillness, we can connect to it and find the answers. So I did that from a very young age. And then, I did lots of things in between then and becoming a naturopathic doctor. But when I became a naturopathic doctor, that was a huge step for me. I stepped out of the role that my parents wanted me to be into a role that felt right for my soul. And that's a beautiful story too, how I got to that. That again was listening to, I call it the field, or, just connected to my higher self. Even becoming a naturopath, you often don't know what the next step is. You're often in this state of pain and, struggle, and just, like, where am I going to go next? And just in asking and in the stillness, I remember I was walking my dog one day. So 2 days before, I had asked, what can I do? What is my purpose on this planet? What is my contribution? And I had no idea. And I was really frustrated. And I was walking my dog, and it was at a time of stillness. And it just came to me out of the blue that I should be a doctor. And
Wow.
that was, it was one of those times where that it's not something that you were thinking. It's not something you'd ever thought of before. So it had to come from something else, somewhere else, right?
Right.
So yeah, it was that alone is, one of my big aha moments that I think back to.
I should say. I should say. Well, you've spoken a couple of words that have really stood out to me. Earlier, you spoke about your voice, having a say. And then you spoke about telling your story, how you came into understanding that you were feeling called to be a doctor, and telling a story from your childhood that called you out of the ordinary. And then the next word I actually wrote down, wanted to come back and talk about it rather, is the word stillness. That in stillness was where you found your answers and you found your life purpose. And that is really outstanding. The word stillness really, really, really caught my attention, Jayne. And I would imagine that once you would have experienced or did experience the sense of stillness, that this has been a guiding practice or guiding energy throughout your life. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, because I mean, the first time it happens, it always comes from practice, but the first time you actually receive, some instruction from your higher self, or the unified field, I call it. And,
Yes, yes.
when that happens, you're like, wow, this really works. This is crazy. And
How well I know what you're saying.
like, I started meditating for fun when I was a kid because, well, that back then I thought it was, I mean, my connection to something more interesting than real life, right? Like, I don't know, it was like practicing to have miracles happen in my life, which
Yes,
was exciting, right?
yes.
So,
Yes, it makes life worth living. So I completely resonate with this, and I know that many of our listeners will totally resonate with what both of us are saying here and agreeing upon. And I think so many of us feel that this is absolutely correct. So if we talk about now your practice, we fast forward to where you are now in life, and before COVID, when you were actually able to be with your patients in person. Again, I can just imagine you, as I'm getting to know you, sitting with your people and finding that you feel drawn to help them come into that place of stillness and hold the space for them to seek their own answers within and become aware of the wisdom of their souls and their bodies working together. Again, I ask, am I assuming correctly, Jayne?
well, yes, absolutely. So I became a naturopathic doctor first, and just to explain the difference between naturopathic
Yes,
medicine and
please do,
homeopathy.
please.
It's always confusing. Um, I have to explain it often and sometimes many times. So a naturopathic doctor learns everything that a doctor would need to learn: pathology, biology, all the systems of the body, physiology, all of that. But then we learn modalities that help a person heal, that are natural modalities. So botanical medicine and Chinese medicine and nutrition and, massage. But one of the things we learn is homeopathy. And when I discovered homeopathy, I resonated so much with that medicine because it didn't just include fixing like the body. It had an energetic component, but it also had a component where you took the mind symptoms and emotional symptoms into consideration as much as the body. So I, by this time, had really resonated with Bruce Lipton and, the biology of belief and how our mind affects our body. So when I sit with someone, I sit with them as a naturopath, but I explain, the role and my love of homeopathy and how it works and how a case is taken. And so I always sit with them taking a case homeopathically. But what happens is, what I do is I sit in resonance with them. So I just connect to them in a very real way, in a way that allows resonance. And how does that happen? It happens through connection, heart to heart. So, allowing them to know that you're also human, that you've also had really difficult times, and then allowing them just to walk their path and walk their story so that I can hear it and I can hear the details that I need so that I can find the right homeopathic remedy. So it's actually walking beside someone and truly listening to them and to their heart that allows me to find a remedy that will help them the most.
That's beautiful, Jayne. That's totally, totally beautiful. I believe this is what is so necessary. And of course, it's what is correct and natural for us, in my opinion. I have a couple of allopathic doctor friends in my life. I'm very grateful to know them. And one of them said, and I'm really going to quote this man verbatim: When you are sick, what you really need is not a doctor. You need a friend. And Jayne, that really took my attention. Now, he was speaking as a doctor. In other words, you need to hire a doctor who will show up as your friend. And that, as I say, struck me so importantly. And that's the way he treated his patients. They were not just numbers or a file folder or whatever, or symptoms. They were genuinely another person sitting across the table from him. And I want to just offer my praise to you for being one of those people who shows up in the world and says, I am here to hear you, to listen to your story, to connect deeply with your heart, and to be the caretaker and the space holder who can help you understand what you really need, communicate that to me, and work out what is necessary and best for you, mind, body, and spirit. And I get so excited about that, Jayne, that, well, I'm sitting here in California and you're sitting in Canada, and I just want to come across the miles and give you a big hug and say, yay!
Well, you're right. Yes, because I think in all of my previous work I did before I became a naturopath, before I became a homeopath, I realized that everyone has a deep, powerful ability to heal. All they have to do is tap into it. And as I became a homeopath, I've become a student of Divyasambhara, who follows my beliefs in mind-body medicine in a really, really interesting way. And she's studying, how the unconscious mind affects the physical body.
Right.
And, this is something that isn't talked about. And to me, it's fundamental to
Well, let's
healing.
talk about this, Jayne, because this is so important that this information get out. And one of the reasons I'm so delighted and excited that you're on my podcast. Talk to us about the 95% of the brain that is unconscious, that seems to be running the gears, and how we might break those corrupt circuits, to borrow your language. Please speak about this.
Yeah, and so much of it we're not even aware of, because we're living in the 5% and the 95% pops in, but we're unaware of how much it affects our lives. So from the ages of 0 to 7, we're actually programmed. We don't have an ability to say, oh, this is true or not true. Like, we don't think it through and discard information. We just absorb everything. So that time period when we're absorbing, of course, we're going to absorb things that aren't serve us, that don't serve us in the future. We can have very difficult times and very painful times and physical things that happen to us. And so a lot of this programming happens at a very young age, and often later in life, it's the programs that happened at that time that need to be broken. So let me explain just how crazy this is. Imagine that there was a child that grew up next to a school, and they ate at the same time that the bell rang at the school. And this is kind of tying in the Pavlovian dog theory, which I can explain after if it's not clear. But imagine they ate at 9 a.m. when the bell rang, at noon when the bell rang, at 3 p.m. when the bell rang, and 6 p.m. And that was okay when they were living as a child next to the school, and the bell only rang every 3 hours, and they were going to eat that time anyway. But imagine then they grew up and they moved and lived close to a train station where there was a bell going off every 10 minutes.
Oh my.
And because of this program for everything, it becomes like a program to everything that happens physiologically in the body, because this part of our mind is also connected to the automatic parts or signals that happen in the body, everything that happens automatically, which I can explain later. So if this bell is going off every 10 minutes, all the juices for digestion start, and the mouth waters and everything happens in order to eat. But of course you shouldn't eat every 10 minutes, but what happens is either they'll develop eating disorder because they'll go ahead and eat, or a peptic ulcer because all the everything is happening in the stomach as if there was going to be food, but totally unaware that this bell is causing all of this to happen. So that's just one simple example. And the automatic mind is also resides in this 95% of our brains. And that is the part of our brain that functions automatically. So it tells our heart when and how to be, we don't have to think about when we breathe. We don't have to tell our kidneys what to do. So we have to go to the washroom. We don't have to tell a wound how to heal, or our hormones what to do. So it's connected. The two are connected. So, if someone's getting a peptic ulcer or high blood pressure, often it has nothing to do with what's happening in the conscious mind. It can have to do with a trigger that's happening in the unconscious mind. So, a state of stress that's happening because of a trigger rather than what's happening in real life.
Absolutely understood. So let's just go back and talk about the Pavlovian response briefly, Jayne, so we have a frame for that.
Yeah, so the experiment of Pavlov was done with a dog, and at first, he realized that every time he brought food, the dog would salivate. And then he wondered if he started to ring a bell and then the food, and the dog would salivate. And then he eventually removed the food and just rang the bell, and the dog would salivate as if there was food. So that's the first experiment with how a circuit can develop in the brain and cause a physiological reaction.
Great, understood. Now, how do we break that corrupt circuit, Jayne?
So there are a number of ways, and I believe hypnotherapy can do it if you go in, because it allows access to the unconscious mind. And just being aware of the fact that you have a circuit running can partially break it. But homeopathy is another way, and it's actually the reason that I'm so passionate about homeopathy as true mind-body medicine. And I think mind-body medicine is another real passion behind my podcast, making people aware that their mind has as much to do with a physical ailment as, anything else. So, and there can be many causes, but I feel that mental, emotional causes are a big part of why we get sick.
Oh, right. I do too. I've experienced it with my own body and my own healing.
Right? It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And just to be aware of it. So homeopathy is, I can explain homeopathy a bit better. I feel like I kind of...
Please do.
kind of blew by it. So homeopathy is a system of medicine that was developed by Hahnemann 150 years ago or so. And he was a great seeker, and realized along his learning that like could cure like, or symptoms of cholera by eating chinchilla bark would be brought about by this. By eating chinchilla bark, you could create the symptoms of malaria. And so he decided in his, as he learned, that he would try giving chinchilla bark in homeopathic form, which is taking chinchilla bark and reducing it to nanoparticles, which we realize now science is starting to understand how homeopathy works. And by giving the substance that caused the same symptoms, and we now call it treating like with like, you could cure the symptoms. So it was a system of medicine developed with that theory, that like cured like. So when you find a remedy for someone, you're looking at what appears when I feel like what appears in the body is a mirror of what's going on in the mind. So the physical symptoms that present themselves and also the mental emotional symptoms are all taken into consideration. And then you match that to a remedy, which is in homeopathic form and comes from nature. So it's an incredible study.
Wow. Wow. So exciting. And
Yeah, I love it.
beyond profound, I'm right there with you, beyond profound. And what I love that you said is that our modern day, as we call it, science is discovering the technology of nanoparticles, and like attracts like, and like works with like, which I believe makes great sense. So I'm so excited about, especially the homeopathy moving forward, right along with naturopathy. I believe this is where the real healing is. And of course, as you know from me being on your wonderful podcast as a guest, that I firmly believe that the word healed means to be whole, WHOLE. And if I look into the ancient Greek word for whole, it means as if the wound never happened, as if the injury never happened. And I believe this is our body's, minds, and soul's ability to just simply heal it as if it never occurred to begin with. And you spoke about, the body knows how to heal itself. And I often, when I speak with people, the intrinsic intelligence of the body, if I have a paper cut on my finger, immediately all the lymphocytes and T cells, et cetera, go rushing to the scene to begin immediate correction of the wound, and ultimately will heal that as if it never happened. How intelligent, how wonderful is that? And as we tap into that internal intrinsic intelligence, how's that for a three-word phrase? We come into the fullness of our power to be completely self-healing. And I believe that you've named your podcast so beautifully, Empowered Health. And I'd like to share with you, Jayne, as a listener to you today, that you spoke about your voice earlier, and I'm sure our listeners will hear the change in tone of my voice because, quite confessionally, just listening to you and your voice, the calmness, the soothingness of it, the musicality of it, my body has begun to go into a state of homeostasis, which means I'm coming into a state of balance and relaxation deep in the core of my belly. Just listening to you, Jayne, just listening to your voice.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
so that's the beauty of sitting and walking beside someone rather than attempting to take over as having the answers to everything, because those answers are within the individual. And what I believe homeopathy does is return us to a state of resonance. It removes the discord that happens, and which is caused by these thoughts that don't really, or they shouldn't have any power over us, but they do. But when that circuit is broken, there's this state of resonance that happens, and then what happens is the person flourishes. And what I find is they love themselves and they make different choices, and they become connected more to who they are and what their purpose is. Like, so many beautiful things happen. So
I'm hearing the smile and the laugh in your voice, and I'm right there with you, as you well know, and as your listeners know, my own personal story and retraining the brain with neuroplasticity, all the rest of it. So now, Jayne, coming into this period that we're in post March of 2020 and the COVID story that we're all living through, you've had to retool, and you've developed this podcast as a way of, I believe, reaching out. And of course, I've been delighted to share that with you. Talk to us more about the purpose of your podcast and the goals that your podcast has, or that you have for your podcast.
Yeah, like going back to when I was a child, I think I learned to not take things as face value, and always look within, and always look to learn from as many different angles as I could. So I think what I saw with COVID was this huge wave of fear that took over people. And that came from what I feel is 40 or 50 years of programming, a fear of disease. And as a naturopath and a homeopath, I realized that our body does have this innate ability to heal. And all we need if we do get sick is the proper support, and that most disease trains the immune system and is actually part of who we are. It's part of living on this planet, and viruses, bacteria, they all have a purpose. And
Right.
so I just saw this wave of fear, that to me was caused by a program. And I just had this deep desire to wake people up to their own inner power, and to have them listen to themselves, and that little voice that might say, hey, maybe I should just question what's going on a little bit and look at it from many different angles and find some truth in it, because things are not as they seem. I think that the fear that's been placed on people on this planet is a way of controlling them, and it's been done brilliantly. And I think that the way out is for each of us to go inside and realize how powerful we are.
Right.
And we wouldn't be
Right.
as afraid.
That's the flag I'm flying.
Like I'm flying. So, and the more I find out every day, I'm like, oh wow, we have been so programmed, so completely.
Yes, indeed. Well, I
Oh,
said something very interesting just moments ago, and I was asking you, what are your goals? And I said, what are the goals that the podcast has? And I thought, well, that was really an interesting way of expressing it. But I understand that that podcast has an energy and a life of its own. So I'm going to call my verbal gaffe something actually probably very important, either that or just make an excuse for my misuse of the English language. But I have this feeling that this podcast is something of yours, is something very, very, very special, and that you have goals for it, and it has a life of its own. Am I correct about that, Jayne?
well, I believe it has a life of its own, and it's only a catalyst. Like everyone I interview, and including you, have this beautiful message of, their own story and how they became empowered from it, and a story of healing, or a story of struggle, and how they were, had these mind, we all come with, I'm not good enough, I don't belong, I'm alone. And, you know, and also the story that everything that happens to us that is what we what appears as bad or negative actually helps us grow and become who we should be. And so that story needs to keep being told, and each time it's told, it empowers somebody out there. So I
Right.
think that's the purpose.
Right. I totally support it. And of course, this is where I live. I just checked off all of those boxes of feeling not good enough, not, feeling alone, all of those things because of my childhood story. And yet, transmuting that, transcending that, I said to our dear friend Wenda yesterday, I came to this wonderful awareness that everything that happened between my parents and myself was brilliantly executed to the point of perfection, because it trained me with every piece of information, wisdom, and knowledge that I need now, and was packaged perfectly. And of course, those mind programming things that lived in my 95% unconscious part of my brain would call into my life people, places, and events that would simply play those negative pieces of information out, so I could work with them. I could actually be in school with them. And today, at this point in my life, I can see the perfection of the training and the wisdom. And that's when I can look back and say, wow, that was perfect. Was it easy? Was it good? Did it feel good? No, it didn't, but it was perfect toolbox gathering and developing, for me, developing of skills, my current skill set. And for that, Ultimately, I am enormously grateful and I praise the perfection of it.
Right? Just,
Right.
yeah, the worst that happens to us actually is our biggest gift.
Right. And this is where you sit with your people. Jayne, sadly, I know that we're coming to the end of our time. And I say sadly because I feel you and I could just talk about this forever and people would want to listen to it forever. But I know we all have our lives and our schedules. How can people get in touch with you to really appreciate your podcast, or if they wish to be a guest on your podcast, or if they, and I may be assuming here, wish to receive your expert consultation?
Oh, yes. If anyone out there has a story to share, I would love that. I have a website. It's called inpoweredhealth.com, inpoweredhealth.com. And there's a contact there. Or my email is Jayne Marquis, and I'm sure you'll spell that out.
Yes.
Jayne Marquis at me.com. And then the podcast is Empowered Health, and it's up on 6 platforms, including iTunes and Spotify. So come find some inspiration there. And yeah, that's how to get in touch with me.
Let me give your email address again. Jayne's name is spelled very beautifully. It is Jayne. The Marquis last name, or the last name of Marquis, is M as in Mary, ARQUIS at me.com. So that's JAYNE MARQUIS at me.com. Dr. Jayne Marquis, this has been such a wonderful time. Before we say goodbye, do you have any words of wisdom you would like to share with our listeners?
Oh, yes. Don't give away your power to anyone else.
Amen. I concur, happily concur. Jayne, thank you for taking time out of your heavy schedule to be on my show today. And I'm sure that we're going to repeat this process in the future. And to our listeners, thank you for taking time to listen to Jayne and what we have discussed today. And may it serve you and bless you very, very, very well. See you next time. Take care in the meantime. Bye-bye.
The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of this podcast, nor is any content intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness of any kind, or substitute for proper professional care in this regard. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed today's show. If you're not already a subscriber, please click on the link and join our ever-growing community of goodwill. If you would like to be a guest on our show, please contact us at drhoperadio@gmail.com. That's drhoperadio@gmail.com. All of us here at the Deidre Reigel Hope and Healing Radio Show wish you a day filled with hope and joy. Till next time, namaste.